hospital room was oppressively cold, the fluorescent lights humming above casting a harsh clinical glare over everything. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, a sharp, sterile odor that made it impossible to breathe deeply. The boy lay, in the hospital bed, his small frame almost swallowed by the two large sheets, his skin pale as porcelain and dotted with the faintest hints of fever. Tubes snaked from his body to various machines that beeped and hissed, each sound a cruel reminder of the fragility of life. His chest rose and fell unevenly, a shallow rhythm that made even the most seasoned nurse hesitate. The Mafia boss stood at the foot of the bed, towering in his tailored suit, his face an unreadable mask of fury and fear. His normally commanding presence was fractured by the helplessness clawing at his insides. He had controlled empires, negotiated wars, and commanded respect through fear. Yet here, he was powerless. His dark eyes flicked over the doctors and nurses, demanding answers they could not provide. Every sigh, every shake of a head, every whispered medical term was a dagger twisting deeper into his patience. The hospital staff knew better than to challenge him directly. Even their silence was loaded with tension, an acknowledgement of the volatile mix of anger and desperation radiating from him. Around the room, the air was thick with anxiety. Nurses exchanged uneasy glances, whispering quietly in corners about the boy's condition and the impossible expectations of the father at the foot of the bed. Some tried to offer reassurances, but their words fell flat, swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere. Doctors, even the most decorated specialists, appeared unusually tense, shuffling their notes and murmuring in low tones. Their confidence, usually so unshakable, was being eroded by the strangeness of the illness and the weight of the father's presence. The boy's mother sat beside the bed, clutching his hand with a grip that was both desperate and fragile. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, and each small twitch of her son's fingers sent her heart racing. She whispered prayers under her breath, words meant to summon protection, life, and hope into the cold, clinical air of the hospital. Her voice trembled, but she refused to let it falter completely, because to falter would be to admit defeat, and there could be no defeat in the presence of her child's suffering. Every few minutes, the machines beeped in warning, a shrill, repetitive sound that made the tension in the room palpable. The doctors adjusted dials, checked readings, and muttered diagnoses to one another, but none offered the clarity or solutions anyone desperately needed. The room felt suspended in time, each second dragging out into an eternity. The Mafia boss's fists clenched at his sides until his knuckles turned white. He muttered low, threatening words, his tone a dangerous mixture of anger and despair. The air vibrated with unspoken tension, every movement and sound charged with fear, frustration, and the weight of expectation. Outside the room, life continued, indifferent and unhurried, but inside, a silent storm raged. This was not just a hospital room, it was a battlefield, a crucible of hope and fear where no one yet knew who would survive the night. And in that room, the impossible was waiting to be challenged, though no one yet knew who would rise to do it. The hallway outside the hospital room was alive with movement, yet the energy was weighed down by a suffocating tension. Doctors arrived, in quick succession, their polished shoes clicking against the linoleum floor, their crisp white coats stiff and immaculate, carrying with them the air of authority and expertise. Each one believed, at least at first, that they would be the one to solve the mystery that had baffled 100 other minds before them. Yet as they entered the room and laid eyes on the boy, hope was immediately tempered by the unsettling irregularity of his symptoms. Inside, the room felt smaller, more constricting than before, as though the walls themselves leaned in to listen to every word, every sigh. The Mafia boss stood silently at the foot of the bed, his posture rigid, his hands twitching slightly as he fought to restrain the storm of frustration building within him. He did not speak. He had learned long ago that words could be weapons, and here they were wasted. The doctors, sensing his scrutiny, tried to assert their authority with clipped medical language, rattling off diagnoses, probabilities, and the rarest of medical terms. Their voices were precise yet strained, carrying the subtle tremor of uncertainty. "I've never seen anything like this," said Dr. Moretti, a renowned specialist in rare diseases, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. His tone was professional, but the edge of disbelief was unmistakable. Another doctor, younger and eager to impress, flipped through a thick binder of notes. "It's beyond conventional diagnosis. We need more tests," he said, his voice betraying both urgency and a creeping panic. The machines surrounding the boy beeped and whirred, their mechanical sounds echoing the mounting tension. Each monitor reading, each flat line of a wave, seemed to mock their confidence, reminding them that conventional medicine had reached its limits. The Mafia boss's eyes darted between the specialists, assessing them not as doctors, but as potential failures. He had spent a lifetime controlling outcomes, bending situations to his will with money, influence, and sheer force of presence. Here, none of that mattered. The doctor's authority was meaningless, their brilliance irrelevant. His impatience was palpable, a silent weight pressing down on everyone in the room. Even the nurses, who moved with practiced composure, felt the chill of his unspoken judgment, their steps faltering as they passed by. The boy's mother sat by his side, her hands trembling as they hovered over his frail body. She whispered soft prayers, fragments of hope clinging to her lips as if the words themselves could pull her child back from the edge. Each doctor's suggestion, each potential diagnosis, only deepened her anxiety. No clear solution had emerged, and each failed attempt was another stab of despair. Time seemed to stretch, dragging minutes into an unbearable eternity. The doctors debated feverishly, their voices rising and falling in an anxious rhythm, each idea more speculative than the last. Their charts and instruments, symbols of their knowledge, now felt hollow and insufficient. Outside the room, the hospital moved in a detached rhythm, indifferent to the storm within. Inside, the impossible challenge loomed larger with every passing second, leaving the room in a suspended state of dread, helplessness, and mounting tension. In the quiet corridors of the hospital, life carried on with mechanical regularity. But the janitor moved through it like a ghost, unnoticed and unremarkable. His uniform was plain, his shoes scuffed, and his mop bucket squeaked softly against the linoleum floor as he navigated the hallways. Staff and visitors alike passed him without a glance, absorbed in their own routines, oblivious to the sharp awareness that hid behind his calm, unassuming exterior. To anyone else, he was just another worker, a fixture in the background, yet his eyes missed nothing. Every detail, every pattern, every subtle shift in the rhythm of life around him was catalogued silently, stored in the recesses of his mind for moments when they might matter most. He had learned over the years that true observation required patience. Doctors, nurses, even visitors, often overlooked the smallest signs, dismissing what they could not categorize or quantify. But he had learned to see between the lines, the way a hand trembled, the barely perceptible flutter of an eyelid, the shallow rise and fall of a chest that spoke more than any chart or machine. His intuition was born not from formal training but from years of watching the world, noticing what others ignored. Life and death were often hidden in the unnoticed details, and he had learned to trust what he saw. That day, the janitor paused, in the hallway outside the boy's room. He had overheard the murmurs of doctors, their debates a tangled web of expertise that offered no answers. He had seen the mother clutch her child, her face etched with fear, and the father, imposing and tense, radiating a desperation that filled the air. Something about the boy's condition resonated with a memory from years ago. A case in a small clinic where a rare, almost invisible symptom had been overlooked. His mind raced quietly, piecing together what the doctors could not, connecting subtle signs with a clarity that surprised even him. He muttered under his breath, almost as if saying it aloud would make it real. "I can." It was a whisper lost in the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant echo of a passing cart, but in it was a determination that carried the weight of hope. He had no authority here, no credentials, and no right to intervene. Yet he felt compelled, drawn by the invisible threads of intuition that guided him. The boy's life depended not on titles or prestige, but on observation. courage and the willingness to act when others faltered. The janitor approached the door slowly, pushing it open with a soft creak that seemed louder than it was. Doctors and nurses turned, eyebrows raised, startled by the unexpected intrusion. Some looked incredulous, others wary. The Mafia boss, sensing something different, paused in his pacing. His dark eyes flicked to the janitor. A mixture of curiosity and disbelief etched across his face. The janitor's gaze did not waver. He saw the boy in a way no one else had, noted the slight irregularities in his breathing, the faintest shadow under his eyes, the imperceptible twitch of his fingers. He knew without a word spoken that he could make a difference. He knelt beside the bed, careful and deliberate, his hands gentle as he observed. His voice was soft but confident, issuing instructions in a rhythm that seemed instinctive, guiding the boy's breathing, adjusting his posture and noticing subtle reactions that no one else had considered. The room, once tense and chaotic, seemed to pause around him, as if the very air waited to see what the janitor could accomplish. The janitor's presence in the room felt almost surreal, like a calm current cutting through a storm of tension. The doctors who had once dominated the space with their clipped instructions and authoritative tones now froze, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. Their eyes flicked nervously between him and the boy, the invisible boundaries of protocol clashing with the undeniable focus radiating from this unassuming man. The Mafia boss, rigid as a statue, studied the janitor with an intensity that made even the most confident physician uneasy. There was something in the man's stillness, in the precision of his movements, that hinted at an understanding beyond credentials or titles. The janitor knelt beside the boy, his hands hovering over his frail body, assessing each subtle movement and irregularity. He whispered gentle instructions to the boy, guiding him in slow, deliberate breaths. His voice was quiet, almost hypnotic, yet carried the weight of certainty. Relax your shoulders. In and out. Focus on the rhythm, he murmured, monitoring the boy's faint responses with keen attention. The doctors exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence shaken by the audacity of someone so clearly unqualified taking command of a room they had long believed was theirs. The machines beeped insistently, their alarms urgent, yet the janitor seemed to move with a rhythm that quieted their urgency rather than exacerbated it. He leaned close to the boy, eyes scanning for the faintest clues, tiny changes in skin tone, the almost imperceptible flutter of an eyelid, a barely audible sigh. With each observation, he adjusted the boy's posture, his head, and even his hands, as though coaxing life back into a body that had teetered on the edge of nothingness. His gestures were simple yet purposeful, grounded in intuition and experience that no degree or title could replicate. The room, once a battleground of frustration and helplessness, seemed to shift in atmosphere. The heavy tension lifted slightly, replaced by a fragile thread of hope. The boy's breathing, shallow and erratic just moments before, began to find a steadier rhythm. Color, faint but unmistakable, returned to his cheeks. The mother's trembling hands tightened around his as tears welled in her eyes. She looked at the janitor, disbelief and gratitude mingling in equal measure. Even the doctors, faces pale and mouths slightly agape, could not deny the transformation occurring before them. For a moment, silence dominated the room. The only sound was the boy's gentler breaths, the faint hum of the machines, and the janitor's calm, guiding voice. The Mafia boss finally spoke, his deep, commanding tone low and deliberate. What? How? His words hung in the air, more a question of astonishment than accusation. The janitor merely shook his head slightly, a modest gesture, acknowledging neither praise nor fear. He continued his quiet, precise work, adjusting and observing, ensuring that every small improvement was stabilized. Minutes passed like hours, but the boy continued to regain strength. His eyes flickered open, weak yet alert, and he whispered a small, uncertain sound. The mother's sobs broke through, a mixture of relief and overwhelming emotion. The doctors, humbled and silent, could only observe, their pride bruised yet incapable of denying what had happened. In that room, the balance of power, knowledge, and respect had shifted unexpectedly, proving that sometimes the greatest authority comes not from titles, degrees, or status, but from the courage to see what others cannot and act when others hesitate. The boy's eyes fluttered open, fragile and unsure, yet carrying a spark of life that had been absent for so long. His small fingers twitched as he became aware of his surroundings, and a weak but unmistakable smile curved across his lips. The mother, sitting beside him, gasped and pressed her face to his, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. She whispered frantic words of relief and gratitude, clinging to him as though her own heartbeat depended on his survival. The Mafia boss, who had stood silent for the past tense-filled minutes, let out a long exhale, his chest rising and falling, with a weight he had carried for far too long. The room, once filled with panic, uncertainty, and frustration, now hummed with a different energy, one of awe, disbelief, and quiet reverence. The doctors, all of whom had been consumed by pride and knowledge, shifted uncomfortably in their positions, unable to reconcile the fact that the solution to a seemingly impossible illness had come from someone without formal credentials. Their charts, their instruments, and their carefully constructed diagnoses had failed, where observation, intuition, and humility had succeeded. The Mafia boss's eyes, sharp and piercing, softened as he looked at the janitor, the unassuming figure who had accomplished what none of the city's best minds could. "You did this?" the boss finally said, his voice low, deliberate, and tinged with a respect that he rarely showed. The janitor merely nodded, keeping his expression modest, almost shy, though a subtle satisfaction flickered in his eyes. He had no desire for recognition, no need for reward. The act itself had been its own validation. He had trusted his instincts, acted despite the chaos and doubt, and proven that sometimes quiet observation and patience outweighed titles, wealth, and authority. The mother continued to cling to her son, whispering words of thanks, gratitude, spilling over in a torrent of relief and love. She looked at the janitor as if seeing a guardian angel in human form, and the boy's small, tentative fingers reached out to grasp his hand, acknowledging the presence that had saved him. Even the Mafia boss, a man who had ruled through fear and power, found himself humbled, his usual arrogance tempered by the undeniable truth of what had just occurred. The doctors murmured amongst themselves, some offering explanations for what they could not have predicted, others silently conceding their limitations. There was no malice in their faces, only the recognition that brilliance alone could not always triumph over circumstance. They had come face to face with an unexpected truth. Expertise was invaluable, but it was the courage to act on observation, and understanding that could sometimes make the difference between life and death. The janitor rose slowly, careful not to draw unnecessary attention, and returned to his mop and bucket as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet the room retained the imprint of his presence, the sense that someone ordinary had performed an extraordinary act. The Mafia boss, his face unreadable yet softened with a rare human warmth, nodded once in acknowledgement, a gesture that carried more weight than any words could convey. In that moment, the lines between power, knowledge, and humility blurred, leaving behind a story of courage, quiet observation, and the profound impact of an unseen hero who had changed the course of a life and a family's world forever.